Well, the results are in. And Alabama, you are not in the playoff. We're going to react to the college football rankings, bowl matchups, and so much more on this edition of the Pigskin Cafe.
Welcome to the Pigskin Cafe, a podcast where Hampton, Chase, and Graham break down all things college football. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
They had to win this game.
There's a problem. This one's tough.
We are back.
That's what my gut's telling me.
I genuinely could not believe it.
You don't live in the great state of Texas.
All right, big boy. Hold my sweet tea.
What are we doing?
That is a stat there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back in to the Pigskin Cafe. My name is Hampton Sipper, and I've got Graham Haney beside me today. And Mr. Chase Haney's not able to join us again this week, but hopefully he is back in the very near future. We're going to be recapping and reacting to the College Football Playoff Committee's final rankings. But before we get into that, quick programming reminder, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. We're trying to get to 200. We're very, very close, only 30 to 40 subscribers away. Hit that subscribe button, leave a like on this video, leave us a comment, and hit that notification bell. We appreciate you guys very much and all the support that we've had in this 2024 college football season. And Graham, let's react to the news of the day, man. We go to church this morning, church gets out, and it's college football playoff committee time, and the rankings are unveiled. And of course, they waited until the last slot between Alabama and SMU. Who would be going to play Penn State in Happy Valley, and SMU got put in over Alabama. There's been a lot of consternation. There's been a lot of debate back and forth amongst Alabama fans, amongst opposing fan bases. The whole country has been divided over this, like the 2024 election. Graham, I have a question for you. We talked last week that we did not feel like Alabama deserved to get in. After what transpired yesterday, did the committee get it right?
Yeah, glad to be back with you, Hampton. If you tune into our social medias at all, you probably saw the clip of me talking about Alabama should not be able to make the playoff. And there's a lot of love getting a lot of comments on that video, a lot of do it. And let me just say this, that if you're listening to this one, I don't disagree with much of anything that was said in the comments. I totally can get behind almost everything that was said. But the results are what the results are. And I think that was the argument last week. That's the argument this week. You control your own destiny. And when you don't take care of your own business, you can't get upset when the other people that do get a better slot than you do. Man, I think that this is probably the most controversial that the committee has maybe not ever been, but I think this will probably be the most controversial that it ever will be, simply for the fact of last year between Florida State and Alabama, there was the big fiasco of who gets that number 4 spot. And I think the reason why this year is more controversial than that is because the dynamic has changed, because it's transformed from 4 teams now to 12 teams. And you're probably, thinking right now, Graham, we're the arguments are completely different. We were arguing about the 4 and 5 team last year, and now we're arguing about I agree with you.
Arguing too.
Yeah. And now we're arguing about who gets ultimately the 11th seed in the playoff. But I think the ramifications of what the committee decided today are going to far outlast what happened last year in the 4-5 turn. And I think this is because the committee chairman, Ward Manuel, came out and said on ESPN that they value strength of schedule, and that commissioners and coaches should remember that and should pretty much take that for what it is. But it was they were talking with one hand and doing something else with the other. They said they valued strength of schedule, but then in the results they did not choose that. I'm not going to sit here and say that SMU does not deserve a slot, because when you argue you lose in a championship game, that's still a valuable game to be a part of. And when you look at SMU's schedule, yes, they haven't had that tough of a schedule, but their only other loss was to BYU on the road. BYU, we think, is a pretty good team. A lot better than Vanderbilt, a lot better than Oklahoma. So that loss is better than what Alabama's loss was. But you can't talk with one hand and do something else with the other and expect people to respect your decision for that.
Mm-hmm.
And expect people to listen to what you have to say and think that you're being truthful and honest. I think that for that, there's always going to be controversy with the committee, regardless of what the decision is. But
Mm-hmm.
whenever you come out and you say that you value one thing and then don't actually value that, it'd be like going to the job and they say, you know what, Hampton, we just so much appreciate what you're doing. We love that you work here, but we're not going to give you a pay raise because at the end of the day, you're not really doing as much as you could do. And it's like, well,
Mm-hmm.
what am I doing a good job and should I get a pay raise, or am I not doing a good job and I'm not getting a pay raise? You can't say one thing and then mean another by
Can't
it.
have it both ways.
Yeah, you can't have it both ways. And so I think that the committee was put in a very difficult spot because of the way Alabama lost to Oklahoma and lost to Vanderbilt, both not being very competitive games when you kind of look back at it, not competitive games. And if they were, maybe the argument's different. But SMU loses 2 games, one to Clemson, one to BYU, both very competitive, both ended up being by 3 scores. And we said it before we got on the podcast that Alabama was one kickoff return away from being in the playoff, because if SMU scores that touchdown and kicks off and Clemson doesn't take it back to nearly midfield, the situation's completely different. And who knows what would happen in overtime. But at the end of the day, the committee made the decision, and you got to live with the results. I think that another thing that's going to be kind of measured or tested, make it controversial, is that Brett McMurphy got the news that he was in Alabama like 45 minutes before it was revealed. Pretty much I think he turned it out at 11 o'clock or something like that. And
Right when the show started.
the show started, and then the results weren't actually given out until 11:30, 11:45 for that spot.
Mm-hmm.
I think when you look at it, we talked about it in some of our group messages, that the results were the tide was turning, and that the betting markets had swapped to SMU making it, which is, most of the time the betting markets are right because that's where people's money.
Vegas knows, man.
Yeah. And so it was very crazy that he knew, and it wasn't like, I think it was SMU is in over Alabama, like he had it from a source, which makes it even
Well, he
more.
said so. Sources told me. Yeah.
Yeah, which makes it even more crazy that it turned out the way that it did.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll add one thing, and then I'll throw it back to you just so we can
Sure.
keep going back and forth. The issue I have with the committee this year is this simple thing right here. And I think this is why it's going to be controversial. People aren't necessarily talking about it. Clemson, SMU play last night. Clemson wins by 3 points. All right. Wake up the next morning. It's Sunday. Results come out. Okay. They give us the top 4. They give us Oregon. They give us Georgia. Nobody argues with those 2. Definitely 1, 2 slated correctly. Full agreement.
Yep.
Then you get to 3, Boise State, and you get to 4 in Arizona State, which, controversial. Probably better than, best conference champions, 4 best conference champions. I think they got them right. Whereas you argue, like, should that be the decision? But that you can't complain about the rules when they're not going in your favor. Well, they throw in Clemson at 12, and so it's like, wow, okay, like, if Clemson's 12, then 11, who's going to be 11 or who's going to be 10, and how's it going to shake out? Clemson beats SMU by 3 points. Results should matter, shouldn't they, Hampton?
They should.
They should. And then what does the committee do? Slots in SMU at 11 and Clemson at 12. That doesn't make much. It's one thing. It's one thing if you put SMU in thinking, oh, that we're going to slide them in, thinking they're a little bit better than Alabama as the 12 seed. But if SMU and Clemson play each other, we can't then say that SMU is still better than Clemson.
Mm-hmm.
The results have to matter. What happens on the field has to matter. And I think as you look at the rest of the bracket, we'll talk about it in a minute. But maybe that falls in line with this situation of they're talking with one hand and doing something else with another. how are you going to respect that? How are you going to get fans to actually buy into this process and respect it?
Yeah.
You know what? This is the decision that was made. They at least had the research. They at least knew what they were doing. Hampton, I think the controversial part is we can't necessarily agree that they do know what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. I agree with all that, Graham. And I wanna touch on your point about the Clemson SMU thing, because I think that argument, therein lies the whole problem with the entire format. I think inherently the 12-team playoff format, not the 12 teams being included itself, the format is the issue. I will get to that in a minute. But before I do that, I want to talk about the Alabama SMU argument. And this is all I'll say. Yes, SMU did not have a signature win on their resume. 100%, they did not. But as you mentioned, their two losses were to a 10-2 BYU team
On the road,
on the road, week 3, which, to add on to that, everybody complaining about strength of schedule and out-of-conference games. SMU had a better out-of-conference game than Alabama, everybody. I haven't heard that point brought up once. They played BYU on the road. Alabama's best out-of-conference game was Wisconsin. All right, 5-7 Wisconsin. You don't fault Alabama for that. If you would have said on paper who is the better matchup coming into the year, you would have said Wisconsin, but that's not how the cookie crumbled. So SMU, to me, yeah, they lost to BYU, but that loss shouldn't be as detrimental to them because it was out of conference. They were trying to beef up their schedule. All right. Then they lose to Clemson, as you mentioned last night, in a whale of a game.
Yep.
And I know everyone will say, well, Clemson was controlling the whole game and it was a blowout early. The reason it was a blowout early is because it was a confluence of events, of turnovers, of sloppy play, which you don't take away Clemson for taking advantage of that, but it was a weird start to a game. Like it was not a normal game script. And then credit to SMU, they got punched in the mouth in the first half. But what did they do? They responded. And they came back and they tied it up. And then, as you said, kickoff return goes to the 40 or 50. Then they get 20 yards and hit a miraculous field goal. And Kyle Edwards can attest. I texted him before he kicked that ball and I said, he is making this. You couldn't have scripted it any better. I knew it was going through. And it was such a Dabo Clemson thing to happen, and credited them for winning that game. But if SMU was going to be in the playoff before they played in the ACC championship game, you shouldn't completely punish them and say you're out of the playoff field now because you lost to Clemson in a literal bounce of the ball type situation. I just don't see that's fair. They played who was in front of them, and they beat them, and they beat many of those teams handily. Now, if you take a look at Alabama, yes, the strength of schedule is much, much better. 100%. They have more quality wins. The Georgia win is an incredible win on the year. South Carolina is a great win. Missouri is 9-3, but I'm not saying that. If anybody watched that game and knew the context of that game, that's not a great win considering they were playing their backup quarterback and literally had 5 to 10 other starters injured. That needs to be looked at in context, and that's the nuance that needs to be had instead of just looking at a W and L by every game. Okay, so if you're looking at it like that and strength of schedule, yeah, Alabama wins out, but we cannot just wipe over the losses of Oklahoma and Vanderbilt. And I saw so many people, even Alabama fans that I love dearly, just completely dismiss them. You cannot. You can't get on SMU for having a weak strength of schedule when you lost to two of the worst teams on your schedule. You lost to two of the teams that you're criticizing them for beating handily on their schedule. That is not good logic to me. That is a double standard to me. And when you go on the road to Norman, Oklahoma, in the final game of the year, and everything is in front of you, you win that one and you win the Iron Bowl, you are in. You're playing in the SEC championship. Everything is out in front of you. But you didn't even score a touchdown. And I get the refs took away one. Whatever. You still did not score a touchdown. You looked awful in that game. You had 225 yards of total offense, and you can hypothetically say, yeah, if Alabama and SMU matched up on a neutral field, Alabama would win. I can't definitively say that. Yeah, if Alabama plays at their best, sure. But how many times has Alabama played at their best this year? A quarter and a half versus Georgia? And then LSU, who I think, Graham, you and I both agree, their defense is not very good. They got abused by every running quarterback that they played, from South Carolina, Texas A&M to Alabama. So you cannot look and say with a straight face that definitively Alabama is a top 12 team in the country. You can't. Talent-wise, yes, but this team, there have been many times throughout the year, and if Alabama fans are being honest with themselves, they can say this. Alabama looked flat out mediocre many times this year. And SMU last night on that field versus Clemson, they proved that they belong. Because usually when you have such a wide talent disparity, it shows up in the trenches. It shows up in Clemson would have been dominating the SMU offensive line and defensive line. They did not. They did not. SMU's defense really settled in that second half, and honestly I thought they played a very physical football game. So, to me, I give credit to the committee. I don't ever want to say that strength of schedule shouldn't matter. It absolutely should. But when you lose to Oklahoma and Vanderbilt, the argument for strength of schedule and your own strength of schedule is greatly diminished, in my opinion. It's not an argument that should save you in that set of circumstances. Like I said last week, if Alabama lost to South Carolina and Missouri, or South Carolina and LSU, and kept the Tennessee loss, I think they'd be in today. 100% think they'd be in today, and I think they would deserve to be in. But that in lies the difference. And I think that going forward, the committee I know he said strength of schedule matters, and again, I don't really believe him, because if you look at the other set of rankings, not even including Alabama and SMU, that logical argument doesn't prove to be valid. But we cannot sacrifice teams not scheduling quality out-of-conference games just because they want to get in the playoff and get an easy ride there. I think that in and of itself is very dangerous to college football. Very dangerous. And Greg Byrne has already put out a statement that they're going to assess how they play their Power 4 out-of-conference games because of this year. Even though I don't think this year should have anything to do with how you schedule out-of-conference in the future, because you shouldn't have lost to Vanderbilt and Oklahoma in the first place. That in lies the problem. You lost to mediocre teams and you got punished. You have no one else to blame but yourself. So going forward, just don't lose to teams you're not supposed to lose to. Yeah. I know it's a lot easier said than done, but that was the issue with Alabama this year. Not the strength of their schedule, the diminishing quality of their losses. And I hope everybody understands that and can take that and move forward into next year with the renewed mindset of, if Alabama loses 2 or 3 games next year with the schedule that they have, but it's South Carolina on the road and Georgia on the road, but they win all the rest, they will be in, because they will not get punished as severely for those losses. Okay? And then as far as the format as a whole, and I want to kick it back to you on this, I think the format as a whole was broken. I am fine with having automatic bids for the championship winners. But there is no reason that a championship winner should earn an opportunity to be in the field. That should lock it up. If you win your conference championship, you're in.
Yeah.
But you shouldn't get an automatic bye. You shouldn't. Boise State and Arizona State should not have an automatic bye right now. It's not right. And that, with the strength of schedule argument, I think is what's upsetting. And I'll even say this. People want to point at SMU shouldn't have got in, and I'm not saying that the Texas Longhorns shouldn't have got in. Texas should not be the 5th seed right now. I would argue that a team like Tennessee might have even a better case of Texas being the 5 seed over Texas, or even Penn State for that matter. Because who has Texas beaten? They beat Texas A&M by 10. That is their best win, an 8-4 team, and their real claim to fame is that they got beat by the SEC champion twice. So I think the format as a whole, with the automatic buys for the conference champions, that should be abolished. It should earn you an opportunity to get in. Then you rank the 12 best teams off of that. And then there are some other rankings that don't make a ton of sense either. Like, I mean, I'm going to pull up the bracket real quick, Graham, but like Penn State arguably has them and Texas have the easiest road to the college football playoff, arguably.
Yeah.
Oregon has the toughest road. Oregon got the number 1 seed, and as their reward, other than having a bye, they get to play Tennessee, the winner of Tennessee and Ohio State. How does that make any sense? So that in and of itself needs to be looked at, and that needs to be evaluated when the committee and the rules for the college football playoff are up for renewal in a few years. So what do you make of all that? What do you make of what I said about SMU? If you don't have anything else to add on that, that's fine and dandy. Just talk about the playoff format and then talk about transition into what this means for the future. I touched on it a little bit with the strength of schedule argument and the conference championship argument and the legitimacy of that. But kind of what are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, I totally agree with you on the playoff format. Needs to swap. It needs to change. Obviously, the format was made several years ago. Whenever there was, six, five or six power conferences. Pac-12, Big 12, Big 10, SEC, ACC, and now you've lost the Pac-12. So you really only have 4, and then it's your best group of 5 conference. So you're guaranteeing a spot to somebody that doesn't necessarily deserve it. Whenever the Pac-12 existed and there were so many others, you're picking 4 out of 5. That's a more logical argument, which could make sense. I think what you should do is just to hey, we can't complain unless we want to give some solutions.
Yeah.
The 2 best conference champions get a bye, and then the next 2 best teams get a bye. So, for example, if there's a matchup where, Penn State was undefeated, Oregon was undefeated, one of them would get a bye and one of them would not. Or Georgia and Texas, both of them undefeated, one of them gets a bye, one of them doesn't get a bye. I think if you win your conference championship and you're the top 2, I would definitely agree with you getting a bye. And I think conference champion should be in. I think, for example, SMU Clemson argument, Clemson won. Clemson should be in. Arizona State should be in. You win your conference, that should mean something. It should be of some value. But you can't diminish the power and the value of being a better team in a tough conference as compared to a good team and a not a good conference. You're pretty much rewarding people for not playing serious competition. And we're not going to sit here and argue that, Boise State and Arizona State should not be in the playoff.
No.
But the argument that they ended up having Boise State at number 9 and Arizona State at 12, that the first, second, 9th, and 12th best team are the ones that gets the bye. And I'm like, that's not right either.
It's a terrible system. That's inherently flawed.
Yeah. And I mean, what you could do is you could swap around the playoff format and make it where there's, you could have like quadrants, like they do in the college basketball March Madness brackets.
Yeah,
and there's north, south, east, west, whatever. Okay, well, if you're a conference champion in one of those, then you get control of that bracket. Maybe you get to pick who you play or something like that. You get to pick out of those people that you play, and then you play again, whatever. But you can't just guarantee somebody a bye just because they won their conference championship. I mean, like we said, we think that Boise State's a good team. There's a lot of people that discredit Boise State for not playing for playing a Mountain West schedule, and that's probably true. But the results on the field have looked very, very impressive. Their only loss was to Oregon by 3. Oregon's undefeated. Oregon won the Big Ten.
Yep.
I think when you look at it, that you could argue that Boise State has the best player in college football. I mean, it went in Ashton Jeanty. So there's got to be at least a discussion about that. But I think that the issue that can't be solved by changing the playoff format and the bracket style, bracket type, is that college football looks way too far ahead in the future when we think about scheduling football games, scheduling events. because you'll see during the offseason where Alabama, Auburn, Texas, Georgia have agreed to play somebody 20 years from now in a home and home. We don't even know that the world's going to exist in 20 years. I mean, let's be
At the
honest.
rate we're going, no.
Yeah, but so we're scheduling things out so far in advance, and then we're complaining that we're going to look at changing the schedule. Whereas it's fine to look 2 or 3 years ahead in advance, but in 15 years, the teams that are good now might not be good. And the way that conference realignment happened, the teams that you scheduled 20 years ago because they were in the ACC, SEC, Big 10, Big 12, Pac 12 are now in the Mountain West, Sun Belt, American Conference because of the way that things adjusted. And to me, I think that's an issue in itself that needs to be addressed outside of just, we're going to decide who we play, Power Four or whatever. It's planning so far in advance that, and then you get upset when the results are what the results are. If you didn't schedule 30 years in advance, then you could be able to change in 2 years. Oh, you know what? Well, this is what the committee values now. Let's go and try and acquire that. Let's go and actually make it looks like that agrees with that. But no, we're locked in for the next 25 years on our non-conference schedule outside of our cupcake buy-in game in case the SEC or the College Football Playoff Committee decides to take us down a game where we can just eliminate it out. So I think there's obviously lots of movement that needs to happen on both sides. But I think that this is the last point, and then I'll move forward. Is that yes, this is the first year of the new format, but we've yet to see a consistent message from the playoff committee that you could trust in years past. I mean, you look at what has happened over the last several years, and what happens one year does not happen the next. Okay, well, last year they saw a Florida State team and they saw an Alabama team. They said, yes, Florida State lost their best player. That matters. And so Alabama got in over that. Whereas you look, now it's like, okay, well, things are different. SMU lost in their conference championship game. I mean, it was a close game. Alabama has more talent. Alabama could be in. And then they went, oh, we value the conference champion. When they didn't last year in the ACC, when Florida State was undefeated. So the consistency, there's got to be, I'm not saying there has to be, the rules have to be more clearly defined, but there has to be a protocol, and it's got to be, we have to stick to it. There should not necessarily have to be a committee in place if there's a set protocol and everybody knows what to expect. You win, you're in. You play, you play serious power, good opponents, and lose. That's better than playing weak opponents and winning. Okay, well, that's got to be clear, and that's the discussion that is I guess made is that when you look at SMU, you look at Alabama. Yes, Alabama has two worse losses, but they played tougher teams. They have better wins. So it's like you're arguing, well, what matters? Who you beat or who you lose to? And I think that's the discussion has to be had as well. I guess I'll throw one more thing, and then I'll put you. Is that you have Notre Dame 1 loss, Indiana 1 loss. They're playing in the first round. Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois. Indiana lost to Ohio State. Well, then which one matters? Does it matter who you lose to? Does it matter who you beat? Then you've got Texas and Clemson 5-12. You got SMU, Penn State 6-11, and I mean, Penn State played really well in the Big Ten championship game last night. And I mean,
that's the best Penn State has looked in maybe 5 years. I would kid you not. That's their best performance in like 5 years under James Franklin.
Yeah. And then Hampton, I totally agree with you. The team that is outside of the top four, I mean, the two scariest teams outside of the top four are Ohio State and Tennessee. I mean, I think that I can say that with an argument that if I'm anybody, I don't want to play Ohio State and I don't want to play Tennessee. Ohio State has arguably the most talent of any team in the college football playoff. And Tennessee, they've got an offense that's incredibly difficult to stop. And when they get hot, they're so hard to slow down. Mm-hmm. Whereas, like, okay, who am I looking at? If I'm Oregon, I'm mad. I'd much rather be.
I'd be infuriated.
4 spots. You're the best seed, and you get the 8-9 matchup, and you get Ohio State and Tennessee. Whereas if you're Georgia, the 2 seed, you get the winner of Indiana and Notre Dame. Which, I mean, no disrespect towards either of them, but not Ohio State, not Tennessee. Boise State has the best. I mean, they've got the easiest road. They play the winner of SMU and Penn State. I mean, they play. They're a conference champion playing the 2 second best teams in either conference, and I think that's a lot more formidable. So very interesting how it all laid out, and who knows? We'll see what happens.
No, I totally agree with you. Oregon got punished for beating Penn State.
Yeah.
They would have been better to have lost that game.
Mm-hmm.
That is what I'm talking about, an inherent flaw in the system. That
Yeah.
has to be fixed because everyone wants to talk about the Alabama SMU argument. There are inconsistencies and problems all throughout this whole bracket. And if you're talking about just Alabama SMU, you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. You are missing the whole picture that needs to be looked at, and that is both Graham and I's points, and I think it's a spot on one. The last point I'll make is everyone has bashed the ACC all year as not being a good conference, and I get it. They're not a good conference.
Yeah.
They
Hey,
don't have a lot of depth, huh?
yeah. And I was watching the ACC championship game last night, and the commentators mentioned that Clemson's best win, their only win against a team that had a winning record all season, was against Pittsburgh.
Pitt. Mm-hmm.
Pittsburgh was 7-5. Pitt started the year off 7-0, and then lost the last 5 games of the season.
Yeah. Well, because Holstein, their quarterback, who was playing really well, got banged up, and I think that really, really affected them.
Yeah.
But to that point, Clemson cannot help. Like, they scheduled Georgia, and they try to play a tough out-of-conference game, and they got beat, and they got beat pretty bad. But if anyone remembers, I know week 1 was a long time ago, that game ended up 34-3, but that game was close in the first half especially. Then, of course, Georgia did what they did, and they extended that lead. But let's not act like Georgia just dominated it from start to finish. And then you want to talk about, I've been a huge proponent of South Carolina. I think South Carolina, if you're talking about one of the 12 best teams playing right now, I think South Carolina is one of those teams. I get why they didn't get in 100%, and part of that had to do with Alabama beating them head-to-head. But we crap on the ACC. Well, Clemson almost beat them. I mean, Clemson came very close to beating them, and then Georgia Tech, who went 7-5 in the ACC, came very close to beating Georgia. So we can
yeah.
Huh?
I said 8 overtimes worth.
8 overtime. So that's what I'm saying. Like I believe the SEC is the toughest conference, but we can't act like the gap is like such a Grand Canyon wide where we diminish like every little, like any type of sort of advantage that a team at the top of their respective conference, like the ACC with Clemson, we can't diminish that just because we're so big on the SEC. The other point I will make is going forward, I think what they did was they preserved conference championship games mattering, and they preserved that if you lose in one and if you lose close and you're already in the field, then more than likely, unless there's an outlier case, you're going to be in. And I appreciate that. And I think they got to get a rein on strength of schedule, mainly with the other rankings, not with the SMU Alabama argument, because I've already laid out why I think that went the way it did and why Alabama's strength of schedule argument doesn't hold much water when you lose to the teams you lost to. But overall, like everything in college football right now, order, rules, guidelines, they are needed. It goes for NIL, it goes for the transfer portal, and it goes to the college football playoff. It is of the utmost importance right now. It is what the sport needs, because I would say this has been one of the more fun years of college football as far as parity, as far as not knowing what's going to happen week to week. Heck, I don't even know who's going to win the national championship at this point, Graham, because it's that wide open. But we have got to establish parameters and guidelines to preserve this sport that we love. Now, let's transition. Let's talk briefly about the championship games. I'm going to give some quick, high-level reactions, kick it to you, let you react. Then we're going to talk about where Alabama is going to be playing their bowl game. So, Arizona State beat the tar out of Iowa State, and I thought they looked mighty impressive. It's the first time I've watched them all year. Cam Scatterbo is a absolute unit, man. I loved watching him play. Very, very fun. very, very physical, tough, and they dismantled a pretty good Iowa State team.
Mm-hmm.
And, we talk about, again, to the SMU point, people kind of diminish BYU not being good. BYU almost beat Arizona State. It took, it was a last second thing, came down the wire with them. So they almost beat the Big 12 champion. So they get in. Texas dominated Georgia for the majority of that game, could never extend the lead, could never get points. And what happened? Georgia hung around. Beck gets hurt. They put Gunnar Stockton in, and they rally back, and they showed the difference between the two programs. Georgia, in those type of games, and they showed it against Georgia Tech. The championship DNA, the championship pedigree, it does matter. Texas does not have that yet. And it's mighty interesting. In the past 3 or 4 big games Texas has had, the past 2 against Georgia, the one against Washington last year, they have kind of come out and played very tight. Had a ton of penalties yesterday, weren't executing. And I'll just say this right now. I don't believe Quinn Ewers can lead them to a national championship. He is simply not good enough right now. He's too inconsistent, too up and down. And I think that it'll be interesting to see with advanced bowl prep, with more bowl prep, more practices, do you have a little bit more of a hybrid situation with him and Arch? I was shocked that they didn't use him more yesterday, especially with how effective Georgia Tech was with using Haynes King's legs in that game. I wonder if Sark employs that a little bit more against Clemson, because I think it's going to be needed going forward. They have everything else. Their defense is elite. Their offensive skill guys are really good, even though they dropped a lot of balls yesterday, which was surprising. But Quinn just simply wasn't good enough yesterday, I thought. And it's going to be interesting to see where they go because they cannot get over that Georgia hump right now. And Georgia, credit to them. I think this is the worst team by their standards. They're not a bad team. I'm just saying by their standards, the worst team that they've had in a few years. They keep winning because Kirby's a great coach. I mean, the call on 4th down on your own 30 to go for it like he did, that's a Nick Saban type move. That's what Nick Saban did. Clemson national championship, he kicked the onside kick. Same type move for Kirby. He knew his team needed a spark. What did they do? They went down, marched, and got a touchdown. Incredible win for them. Now they get to sit at home and rest up. And then finally, Oregon, Penn State, we talked about, back and forth battle. Oregon's defense, a little questionable. Penn State hadn't moved the ball that effectively all year. So that's something I'm kind of eyeing, but their offense is absolutely explosive and prolific. And then the SMU game, like I said, I don't think, if I had to pick them, I would not pick them to beat Penn State. I don't think they're going to get embarrassed either, though. And I may be wrong on that. I may eat my words. But the team I saw last night, that is not a bad ball club. I think they've got a quarterback who has a lot of moxie, a lot of grit. Dude's got a rocket arm.
Yeah.
I think they can give Penn State some trouble. I think weather will play a factor, but I think that matchup's a little more intriguing than a lot of people are making it out to be. Graham, what do you make of all the conference championship games? Anything else you have reaction-wise from them?
Yeah, I guess I'll go somewhat in reverse order. I'll talk about SMU first. SMU has done a great job all year of digging themselves out of holes that they create. Again, watching the ACC championship game, I did not know that SMU turned the ball over had like a -6 turnover margin against Duke.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That's absolutely incredible. I think that you look at, and I would agree with you. The SMU is not going to go to, you're going to go to Penn State and get blown out because they know how to respond. Even if things don't go their way, they do a great job of responding and have all year. So I will at least think that SMU will keep that close. So let's go to Big Ten. Penn State. I mean, I think that everybody's expectation of Penn State was for them to lay an egg like they usually do in these big time games. But Penn State played very well and earned, I think, a good amount of respect from people, especially James Franklin as well, because they came and played well. I think that that's the issue that Penn State has had year over year is that the big games would come and they would not play well. It's not like they would lose; they wouldn't play well either. So credit to Oregon. Dan Lanning's got a good team out there in Eugene. James Franklin's got a good team at Penn State too, which I think is could at least be somewhat scary and could make that top four.
Mm-hmm.
The Big 12. Well, let's go to ACC. ACC, like I talked about, SMU just respond well. They don't feel like there's ever too much pressure. That Rhett Lashley's done a great job. A team that definitely does not have as much talent as a team like Clemson, and hunger and really was back against the wall and came back and responded very, very well. I mean, it was
Yep.
what was it, 21-7? Early in the first half,
24-7.
24-7. Yeah, and then it
Then
turned
31-14.
yeah, and it turned that around completely in the second half. Kudos to them. Um, the Big 12, Arizona State arguably could be playing the best football of any team in the country. To go to a big time game in Dallas against Iowa State, which is not a team that's going to overwhelm you with talent, but is a team that is gritty and is tough. I mean, Arizona State put it to them and had everything going in the right direction. Kenny Dillingham and Arizona State, what an incredible story. Arizona was the talk of the Big 12 this year before the season started, and Arizona was predicted to finish last in the Big 12, and they finished first and did not run the table. They had some bad losses, but arguably playing the best that any team is in the country. And then the SEC championship. I mean, what a great game. The first overtime game in SEC championship history. Carson Beck goes down at the end of the first half. And so Georgia's playing with a backup quarterback, and they still find a way to pull it out in the end. A great game, and honestly worth the respect of everybody watching. So a great day of championship football for sure.
Absolutely, Graham. And I apologize for looking at my phone, but we've had a lot of breaking news here in the past 30 minutes. I'm going to hit you with here in just a minute. Great recap of the championship games. And I'm glad that they maintained their importance yesterday. I am glad that they were good games because I love conference championship weekend. And to end the season, the regular season pretty much like that, I thought was just absolutely fantastic. But Alabama did not make the playoff, but they did make the
ReliaQuest Bowl.
ReliaQuest Bowl. I was about to call it the Zasparilla Bowl. The ReliaQuest Bowl in Tampa Bay, and they're going to be having a rematch versus the Michigan Wolverines, who just knocked off Ohio State. I like the matchup. I'm excited to see who opts out, who's leaving. Does Ty Simpson start in this game? Because the breaking news that we had, Graham, Caleb Odom has jumped in the portal. Miles McVay has jumped in the portal. And Kendrick Law has jumped in the portal. Pretty significant because you got two guys in Odom and Law who played a good bit this year.
Mm-hmm.
What do you make? I'll give my thoughts after you give yours. What do you make of those guys leaving, first and foremost? But then talk about what you want to see. Not so much a breakdown of matchups, Alabama versus Michigan. What do you want to see in this upcoming bowl game versus Michigan?
Yeah, I think that's obviously expected, and I think that the portal technically opens tomorrow, which is Monday. I think it opens tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not surprised at all to see a lot of guys hitting the portal. And honestly, I don't necessarily know if making the college football playoff keeps some of those guys out of the portal either. Because of the way that scholarships and NIL is done, there's only so much money to go around. So if you keep waiting, the money's going to get tighter and tighter and tighter because there's certain teams that are looking to buy and buy early, and once their money's gone and their scholarships are gone, then they're gone. So I think that that's not surprising at all, and if anything, it was definitely expected, especially just in this environment. But also the way that the season, the way that it shook out, just not surprising at all. And I think that when you look at it, there'll probably be a lot more names that go in as well. And again, probably not a bad thing either.
No.
It is interesting to see that those certain players, Kendrick Law, Caleb Odom, both enter the portal. I think that I'm not going to bring up the discussion of is it because they're upset of who their quarterback's going to be, but maybe it could be. Who knows? Hint, hint. But I think that when you look at it, since the playoff has expanded, and now that it's at 12, again we had this discussion with the 14 playoff and how it kind of downgrades other bowl matchups and other bowl games, and I think that even playing Michigan this year is also another downgrade as well. Not that Michigan is a bad football team, but currently in the AP, I don't believe that Michigan's ranked. Yeah, I don't believe they're ranked. Just double check before I say that and then walk over it. Okay. Yeah, in the AP, Michigan is not ranked. So for Alabama to be the first team out and arguably a top 10 team, and I think they ended up being 10 or 11 in the final playoff rankings. And now they're playing Michigan, who is obviously a respectable program and one of the best in the country, won the national championship last year, but is unranked this year and has had a very up and down season. And I mean, if you take away them beating Ohio State, then arguably a bad season, even though they would have made a bowl game. So interesting matchup in the ReliaQuest Bowl, and I don't necessarily know that Alabama has a lot to play for, which is the sad thing. And I'm not saying that because they're not going to show up, but I'm saying that you didn't make the playoff bowl. Let's show them that we're ReliaQuest Bowl champions and raise the trophy high. Like you did a few years ago whenever they played Kansas State in the Sugar Bowl. Hey, we got something to prove, and we've got a formidable opponent, Kansas State. We got to go show that we made it.
And we did.
Yeah, and if Alabama could go and beat the tar out of Michigan, and I don't think anybody's going to change the conversation of, Alabama was national championship worthy. I think this very much changed that discussion. But I do think it's a great opportunity for Kalen DeBoer to try something new. He's been given the team that he was, and with the situation as it was, he had to play with the guys that he had in a scheme that was what we thought they could do well in. This is a chance for Kalen DeBoer to just try something new. It does not have to be full Kalen DeBoer 100%, but try something new, because if you lose, so what? You didn't make the playoff. You're not going to be the national champion anyway. If you win, so what? You're ReliaQuest Bowl champions. Put that on your trophy in your garage. What is worth?
Put in the trophy closet.
Yeah,
Don't put it in the trophy room.
Yeah, send that one to get cleaned and never bring it back. Just forget to pick it up. I think that Alabama has really a chance to try something new, and I think with some of these players hitting the portal will give us a good opportunity to see newer guys on the block that may not have been given the opportunity in some of these games, because the games are so close. You just had to go with the guy that you knew was best, not the guy that might fit the scheme the best. And I think that not saying that Alabama's going to come out completely different in the ReliaQuest Bowl, but it would be nice to see if there was a change up there, which I think would give a little bit of fire to the team, in sense, hey, like, this is my team now. Not last year it was my team, but I was given certain, not restrictions, but you got to sleep in the bed that the bed that's made for you. And so I think now for Kalen DeBoer and his system and his scheme and his coaching staff, it'll be interesting to see. Caleb Odom, a young guy, so definitely a big loss in the portal. Kendrick Law actually put together some pretty good tape this year, and I don't know whether he'll go somewhere else or if he'll stay at Bama just trying to get some more money or something like that. But I think a guy that has to kind of put himself out there, because he's has been given the comp to Debo, but not necessarily the receiver that we needed this year since Ryan Williams kind of took the stage. I think it's one of those things that a good player, but just might be better in a different situation, a different system, and you can mutually agree to part ways and it'd be okay.
I agree with all that. I love Kendrick Law. I love the idea of Kendrick Law. That's a better way to put it.
Yeah.
Because the actual production on the field is just not matched the glimpse that you see like once every 3 games. I think he's a really physical player. I love the way he blocked on the perimeter. Thought he was kind of an enforcer in that room. But the guy just never made enough plays in his time at Alabama. Caleb Odom, I think, is very unfortunate and a very unfortunate loss.
Yeah.
I like his upside a ton.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I think he's probably going to go to Colorado and play with his high school quarterback, his former high school quarterback, Julian Lewis. And I'm sorry, but if you don't want to be at Alabama, then hey, you have the right to go. And if you don't want to be there, Alabama will find somebody to replace him. They
Yeah.
got Derek Meadows in the portal, or not in the portal, at a high school, 6'6" guy, very similar body type to Odom. So that's kind of a 1-for-1 replacement. What you got?
Yeah, and I think that just to add to that point, I think when you look at it, there's hardly any discussion of the signing day Wednesday because of this. People go to a school and they transfer.
Within a year.
Within a year, and so there's no reason to get really excited about having a guy when you don't really know if he's going to be there long term. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think that is it surprising? Maybe, but in the world we live in now, it's just kind of expected at this point. Oh well, you can't keep everybody that you had in your recruiting class from last year.
Well, I'll just say this. After the Vanderbilt game, when he was tweeting and retweeting stuff about Jalen Milroe and not getting enough touches in the red zone and all that kind of stuff, the writing was a little bit on the wall. Like I'm not surprised or shocked at all that he is gone. I wish him the best. Miles McVay also entered. I don't think he would have ever been a meaningful starter at Alabama, especially with the offensive line class that is coming in that was signed on Wednesday. I don't think he would beat those guys out, especially. So there are going to be more portal losses, and I would not be shocked. I'm not going to say who on this podcast. I think there's a prominent Alabama player who played a good bit this year that is going to be gone. And it's going to shock some folks, but I think he's going to be gone. And what I hope in this Michigan game, you said it doesn't mean much. And I agree with you. For the 2024 season, you're not going to hang a banner for the ReliaQuest Bowl. You're not going to do it.
You're not going to bring him back in 2034 and honor the 2024 ReliaQuest Bowl champions at halftime.
I can't say that that'll be on the docket for when we play Penn State at home in 2034, but I think the best comps for this game, to a degree, the 2019 Citrus Bowl versus Michigan, where Mac Jones came in and played because Tua got hurt against Mississippi State, and it was a solid springboard for the next year. What happened the next year? Alabama went undefeated.
Dominated.
Maybe the greatest Saban team ever. I would honestly say probably not, and I'm not going to get into that whole argument as to why I don't think they're the best Saban team. We'll say that for another day. And then 2010, they played Michigan State in the Capital One Bowl. They were 9-3 that year, and they absolutely tore Michigan State a new one. Next year, won a national championship. Treat this game, this bowl game, as the first game of 2025. And I think that starts with, if Jalen Milroe decides to play, great. That's his prerogative. But I hope that he opts out, and I get why he would. And I hope Todd Clemson gets an opportunity. And I want to see him get actual meaningful game action and just see what it looks like. Get him some experience for the full-fledged competition that is going to happen in the spring. That's going to be fascinating with Keelan, Russell, number 2 player in the country, him, Austin Mack, and Dylan Lonergan if he stays, which I'm not sure if he's going to or not. I just want to see what it looks like. Because you said, I think this is the first time, and again, you'll see more of it next year, you will see the actual Kalen DeBoer Alabama program. You've seen glimpses of it this year, but you haven't seen the full thing. And I think part of the guys getting in the portal is part of him crafting the program into more of his image. Because I do think there are some things that he had to deal with this year that the common public won't know about, and it may never come out. But I think going forward, when his culture really kind of is entrenched and he gets his guys, I think the program's going to be better for it. So, Graham, any last words on Alabama, Michigan? We'll probably do a pod previewing it as we react to other college football playoff games that'll happen now in less than 2 weeks, which is really exciting. Any closing thoughts, man?
Yeah, I just agree with you. I think there's got to be a lot of guys that get meaningful snaps in this bowl game. Um, Guys that might not have gotten enough touches, guys that might not have had enough snaps, that need to get some time on the field because we need to know, especially in this NIL situation, we need to know who's going to be lining up in each position next year. We got to know whether we need to go get somebody or not. We need to know whether we have a quarterback for the future or not. We need to know these things. And I'm not
Yes.
like we gotta get the genie ball out and read the crystal ball, but you got to have a system in place to know if one man goes down, we have a quality person that can go up behind them. And I think that this is Kalen DeBoer's first full off season as the head coach,
Yes.
arguably the first off season at Alabama. So it'll be interesting to see how everything shapes up. Interesting to see the guys that commit to play, the guys that don't commit to play. And for a guy like Milroe, he's got some decisions he has to make. I mean, I think he's a top 5 NFL quarterback prospect, which is, another argument for another day.
We
But
don't have enough time today.
yeah, but arguably a top 3 round draft pick
Mm-hmm.
based off of that. So it'll be interesting to see. So there's a lot of guys that have a lot they can prove. It's just whether they're willing to or not.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that, Graham. And what a show! I thought it was fun reacting to the playoff with you. Fun to react live to some transfer portal entries from the Alabama Crimson Tide, and they take on Michigan in the ReliQuest Bowl on New Year's Eve. And you can bet your bottom dollar here on the Pigskin Cafe, we will be previewing it, reacting to any madness that goes on in the Alabama football and college football world over the next 2 weeks. And we'll be back to preview and recap college football playoff games. We've got a lot of exciting stuff coming over the next month. And if you made it this far, we appreciate you for doing so. Hit that subscribe button, leave us a like, leave us a comment on whether you thought Alabama should get in or not. We got plenty of comments last week. We'd love to hear back from you again, even if you disagree. That's what's beautiful about America. If you disagree, we can have a discussion, and we don't have to call each other names. Talking to you, Auburn Shepherd, and we can just go about our way and go about our day. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for supporting us this year, and we'll be back to preview and react to college football playoff games. But the Pigskin Cafe is going to be closed for now. But until next time, chew on that.